Get ready, because today we're going to look at some good scenes that stand out in bad or messy movies. By the way, my name is Brandon McNulty. I'm the author of The Half Murders, and welcome to my writing channel. I wanted to try something different today, so we're going to look at how good scenes can work even within the context of a bad or sloppy story. We'll be looking at 5 specific movies today. I'll explain why these movies had issues and how certain scenes within them managed to shine regardless. Here's your spoiler warning for today. The ones in red contain heavy spoilers. Now I want to start off by answering the question, what makes a good scene? And I came up with 5 reasons for this, and the first one is scene structure. Now, there are 2 main types of scenes, action scenes and reaction scenes. Action scenes are goal-oriented scenes. A character has a goal, meaning that they want something, then they face conflict or obstacles that prevent them from obtaining their goal, and finally there is resolution. Usually the resolution is a disaster because disaster creates new problems for the character to solve. So again, action scenes follow a pattern of goal, conflict, disaster. Reaction scenes, meanwhile, follow another 3-step pattern. First, the character has an emotional reaction to an event. Then they face a dilemma. What should they do next? They'll have to weigh 2 or more bad options, and they'll have to determine which option is best. Finally, they make a decision. They choose the option they believe is best, and they pursue a new goal. So the pattern for reaction scenes goes reaction, dilemma, decision. Second thing that makes a scene good is a change in scene values. A scene should have something at stake, and the value of that something should change over the course of the scene. For instance, evidence might be the value at stake. At the beginning of a scene, a detective might be searching for evidence, then by the end, they find a clue that leads them to the killer. Another example of a value might be safety. A character might be safe at the start of a scene, but then at the end, they might be in danger or captured or dead. Third thing that makes a scene good is an emotional shift. This is usually the result of that change in scene values that we just discussed. When something of value is gained, there's emotional uplift. When something of value is lost, the setback can be frustrating or outright soul-crushing. Fourth thing that good scenes do, they engage with the story's themes. And this involves the central ideas that a story is exploring or what central questions a story is trying to answer. Good scenes will typically connect with the story's theme and allow characters to learn and grow along their journey. And then finally, the 5th thing that makes a scene good is creativity. And this means expressing ideas in fresh or surprising ways. Not every scene needs to be wildly original, but it helps if the scene feels inspired to some extent. All right, now let's look at some good scenes from bad movies. And the first one we're going to look at today is the original Friday the 13th. I'm pretty sure everyone has at least heard of Friday the 13th. It's an old school slasher movie, which means it follows a formula where people commit a sin, and then a killer goes around murdering the sinners one by one. Now, usually the first movie in a slasher franchise is pretty good, and from there it's mostly downhill with the sequels. Strangely, however, the original Friday the 13th is an all-around awful movie, so bad that it's regarded as a form of torture in many countries. And the premise here is pretty simple. In the late 50s, Camp Crystal Lake was the site of a tragedy. What happened was the camp counselors were hooking up when they should have been supervising the younger kids, and as a result, one boy died. Since then, other tragedies have struck the camp through the years, and we jump ahead to the present day. Here we get introduced to a bunch of aggressively generic teenagers. They're neither likable nor hateable, and as a result, there's no emotional impact when they get killed over the course of the story. It's not until the end that we get a genuinely good scene. This scene comes after the final girl, Alice, learns that all of her friends have been killed. While running around the camp in a state of panic, she bumps into a woman named Mrs. Voorhees, who claims to be a friend of the camp's owner. Though initially the woman appears disturbed by the murders, she soon reveals that her son Jason was the young boy who drowned in 1957. She blames his death on the irresponsible camp counselors and then reveals herself to be the present-day killer. And this is a good scene because not only does it deliver a surprising plot twist, but it hits with emotional impact, and it expresses the twisted yet human motivations of a grieving mother. Next up, let's look at Failure to Launch. This movie is a dumpster fire. If you remember, I recently talked about it in my worst romance cliches video, and it follows a 35-year-old man named Trip who's living at home with his parents. The parents are played by Terry Bradshaw and Kathy Bates, and they want Trip to move out. But instead of just asking him to find an apartment like sensible people, they hire a woman named Paula to intervene. Paula's job is to make Trip fall in love with her and then break his heart, which, according to the script, will motivate him to become independent and move out. Trip and Paula date for a while until he figures out that his parents hired her to be his pretend girlfriend. He then gets upset, breaks up with her, moves out, and starts living on a boat. Eventually, he decides to visit his parents' house to pick up some of his things, and when he speaks to his mom, we get a surprisingly emotional scene.
For years, I'd been dreading the day you'd leave, and I always thought it was because I'd miss you so much. Then I realized that was only part of it. Since your father retired, I'm used to having you here. Like a buffer, somebody to talk to when your father's all moody and sullen. And now we're just gonna have to get to know each other all over again. What if he doesn't like me?
Her fears are realistic and human, and this scene contains more heart, truth, and sincerity than the entire romantic plotline that's supposed to be driving this story. And this is a good scene because here we have an unexpectedly real and emotional exchange. We get to learn this believable motivation that the mom has, and the value of fear shifts toward reassurance as Trip comforts her. And this whole scene connects with the story's theme of learning to embrace change. Next up, we're going to talk about The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And look, I know I'm going to get some heat for calling this one a bad movie. I know a lot of people like it, and ever since Spider-Man No Way Home, there's been this renewed appreciation for the Amazing movies. I get it. But the thing is, Amazing 2 is a mess. It tried to cram too many things into one movie, and what could have been a tight story ended up as a bloated one. There's just too much going on with the Electro storyline, the Oscorp storyline, then you got Peter and Gwen's romance, and next thing you know, Harry Osborn is the Green Goblin, even though we just got introduced to him 20 minutes into the movie, and then the Rhino's involved, and they're setting up for the Sinister Six, and this and that, and it's like nobody learned anything from Spider-Man 3 when that tried to do too much. The whole thing is just frustrating. Anyway, one thing I really liked about this movie was Peter and Gwen's romantic subplot. If you remember, in the previous movie, Peter promised Gwen's father that he would stop dating her for her own safety. Then in this movie, he goes back on that promise, and the romantic subplot reaches its tragic climax when Gwen gets captured by the Green Goblin. Spider-Man chases after them, and before long, the three end up inside a clock tower. The battle between hero and villain rages on while Gwen desperately clings to a single web. Then the web is cut by the gears, and she plummets toward her apparent death. Spidey launches another web to save her, and it catches her just before she hits the floor, but in a heartbreaking twist, she strikes the ground anyway. Peter then checks on her and breaks down as he realizes that she's gone. And this scene is not just good, it's great. It's an undeniably powerful death scene that delivers heavy heartbreak, and there's an excellent use of tension and suspense throughout the scene, and ultimately it delivers a brutal lesson on responsibility and the cost of being a hero. Now let's look at College Road Trip. And if you ever want to permanently ruin someone's life, show them this movie. Seriously, tie your enemies to a chair and force them to watch this thing. They will never recover from it. Now, the story follows an overprotective police captain and his college-bound daughter. They live in Chicago, and she wants to go to college in Washington, D.C. However, Dad wants her to stay local and attend Northwestern, and this leads to some arguments, and they eventually go on a road trip together that's loaded with cornball humor, goofy scenarios, and fatal amounts of Donny Osmond. Somehow, there's a decent scene mixed in here, and it comes when the father and daughter visit Northwestern. While touring the campus, the daughter meets an attractive college guy who offers to give her a personal tour. Dad seems okay with it, and he's willing to let her walk around with the guy if it boosts her chances of staying local. This adds some much-needed intrigue to the story, and the personal tour wins her over until the guy lets it slip that he's actually an undercover cop working for her father. This leads to a comedic payoff where she confronts her dad, and we see that he has planted several other officers across the campus in a desperate effort to manipulate her. This is a good scene because it shows the extremes her father is willing to go to. It leans into his flaw of overprotectiveness and dials things up to 11. This comes early on in the movie, and it shows his need for change and his room for growth. And the scene offers some clever surprises in a mostly brainless movie, and there's a creative use of the father's occupation. Finally, let's talk about Star Wars: The Last Jedi. And look, the internet has discussed this movie to death, so I'm not going to go into any lengthy explanations of why this movie is flawed. We've all heard the complaints. We know how The Last Jedi tried too hard to subvert expectations. It turned Luke Skywalker into Jake Skywalker, and it delivered a clumsy clumsy balance of drama and humor. We've heard it all. Instead, let's just jump to the one scene I actually love from this movie. It comes early on when Kylo Ren is flying his TIE fighter and he attacks the hangar containing a number of Resistance ships. Shortly after, he has the opportunity to shoot and kill Princess Leia. Leia is of course his mother, and in the previous movie, Kylo showed he was willing to kill his father in order to continue embracing the dark side. Having watched him kill his father, we expect he's willing to do the same to his mother. However, to our surprise, he hesitates. There's a moment where the two characters sense each other's presence, and the conflict boils across Kylo's face. Not only does he hesitate with his thumbs above the triggers, but after a clear internal struggle, he refuses to murder his mother. It's a strong moment of character development, but it's not enough to protect Leia. Instead, his wingmen follow through with the attack, and they blast her ship. And this outcome speaks to the fact that one good decision does not undo many years' worth of bad choices. This is a good scene because you have a compelling dilemma and decision here. This is a reaction scene where Kylo reacts to the opportunity of being able to kill his mother, and he faces a strong internal dilemma before making a surprising decision. There's also emotional impact here. When I saw this movie in the theater and he opted not to shoot Leia, I thought the movie might actually be turning the corner. Sadly, it didn't, because right after the scene, the movie got cute with the flying Leia routine, but for a moment there was hope. And finally, this scene contains a tragic outcome that shows that Kylo Ren isn't powerful enough to control a single space battle, let alone the galaxy. It shows his room for growth, whether he chooses to go with the light side or the dark side. So I hope this helps. Question of the day: what is your favorite scene from a bad story? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching. If you want to support the channel, please pick up a copy of my new book, The Half Murders. I've been pitching it as Jekyll and Hyde meets The Haunting of Hill House, and it's about a woman and her daughter who enter a haunted house and they get chopped in half by a malevolent force. And for them, the nightmare is only beginning. So definitely check that out. I'll link to it in the description below. And also check out my other videos, like, share, and subscribe. And as always, remember to keep on writing.